Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we focus on one essential component of the epistemic firewall. In this final foundational part, part 20, we reach the ultimate valuation engine of the firewall: complexity and degrees of freedom accounting, counting the hidden price of a law. This is the mechanism that transforms the intuitive preference for simplicity from a vague aesthetic into a rigorous, quantitative, and unforgiving audit. The skill you will gain is that of a complexity auditor, the ability to open the books of any proposed rule and calculate its true informational cost, exposing elegant frauds and validating genuinely efficient grammars. Our core question is, how do we quantify simplicity so it can't be manipulated? This question confronts the final loophole in rule selection. In part 19, we established the minimal grammar principle: prefer the smallest constraint set. But what is smallest? A clever proponent can always claim their complex rule is elegant or deeply simple in some philosophical sense. The firewall's accounting function slams this loophole shut. Complexity must be computed, not claimed. We must measure the effective degrees of freedom a rule consumes, its capacity to compress data, and the penalties for its flexibility. A rule's price is paid in the currency of information. We must count the coins. The core revelation is the true cost of a rule is the data it requires to justify itself. A simple rule is a massive compression of reality. It takes a vast set of possible phi sentences and summarizes them with a few bits of information, its parameters and functional form. A complex rule is a poor compressor. It needs almost as many bits to describe itself as the raw data it purports to explain. The firewall measures this compression ratio. It asks, how much have you truly explained, and how much are you just parroting back? Let's build this accounting system from first principles. We start with a set of n phi sentences, our data ensemble D. Each sentence is a string of numbers with uncertainty. The raw, uncompressed size of this data is proportional to n. Now, a candidate rule G proposes a model. It says, these n sentences are not random. They are generated by a process described by my grammar, which has a certain intrinsic complexity. We need to measure two things. 1. The complexity cost of the rule G itself. How many bits does it take to fully specify G? 2. The residual cost of the data given G. After using G to explain the data, how many bits are needed to describe the remaining discrepancies, the noise, the residuals? The total description length of the data using rule G is the sum. Description length equals cost G plus cost dg. Spoken. Description length equals the cost of G plus the cost of D given G. This framework, known as minimum description length, MDL, is our master audio equation. The rule G that minimizes this total description length is the winner. It achieves the best trade-off. It is itself not too costly to state, and it compresses the data efficiently, leaving little residual noise to describe. Now, let's unpack these costs in audible holophase terms. Cost G, the price of the grammar. This is not just the parameter count P, a parameter that can take any real number from negative infinity to infinity would cost infinite bits to specify with perfect precision. In practice, parameters are specified with finite precision, limited by the data. The key concept is effective degrees of freedom. We can approximate cos G as cos G equal D 1/2 times EDF times log 2n. Cost of G is approximately 1/2 times the effective degrees of freedom times log base 2 of n. Where does this come from? To specify a parameter fit from n data points, the typical precision needed is proportional to 1 over the square root of n. In bits, this precision costs about 1/2 times log 2n bits per true degree of freedom. The EDF is often close to the parameter count P, but it can be less if parameters are correlated or the model is rigid. Cost DG, the price of the residuals. This is the cost of encoding the differences between the data predicted by G and the actual data, within their uncertainties delta. If G is perfect, this cost is just the cost of encoding the inherent noise, which is given by the negative log likelihood. For Gaussian uncertainties, this is proportional to our old friend chi-squared. More precisely, cost of D to G epochtedly 1/2 times chi-squared over log of 2 plus constant terms. Cost of D given G is approximately 1/2 times chi-squared divided by the natural logarithm of 2 plus constant terms. Thus, minimizing description length is very similar to minimizing BIC equals chi-squared plus EDF times log of n, which we saw in part 19. The MDL framework provides the deeper informational justification. BIC is an approximation of description length. The rule that minimizes BIC is the one that provides the most succinct total message describing the data. This is our objective, non-manipulable measure of simplicity. You cannot claim your rule is simple if its EDF is high or its chi-square is high. The numbers dictate the cost. Now, why is this rigorous accounting necessary? The failure mode it prevents is the substitution of philosophical hand-waving for quantitative discipline. Without it, theorists can argue endlessly about whether consciousness is simple or string theory is elegant. The firewall's audit demands: show me the EDF, show me the compression ratio, compute the BIC against the standard model. This forces the debate onto measurable ground. It prevents complexity from being hidden in vague language or unconstrained mathematical spaces. Let's integrate this with the triunity. Our accounting must be triunity aware. We measure complexity not separately but jointly. How many knobs does the grammar have across omega k power v? And how much data does it consume to justify them? A rule might have 3 parameters, but if all 3 are solely in the omega clause, temporal dynamics, while the k and v clauses are trivial, that's a lopsided complexity. It's not triunity minimal. Our accounting should penalize such imbalance. The effective degrees of freedom, EDF, should be computed per triunity sector. We can define EDF omega, degrees of freedom in temporal constraints. EDF k, degrees of freedom in spatial constraints. EDF v, degrees of freedom in motional coupling constraints. A balanced, efficient grammar will have a low total EDF and a balanced distribution across the 3. A grammar with a high EDF omega but near 0 EDF k is suspect. It's trying to explain spatial patterns solely through intricate temporal dynamics, which is often a sign of overfitting or a missed spatial degree of freedom. The total informational cost, cost G, should reflect this distributional imbalance as a risk factor. Now, connect this decisively to energy as tally. This is where bad accounting creates phantom balance sheets. If a rule needs excessive complexity to keep the energy ledger balanced, It's like a company that looks profitable only because it hides costs off book. Consider dark energy. The observed cosmic acceleration can be explained by adding a cosmological constant, lambda, to Einstein's equations. This adds one parameter, a simple constant energy density. That's a relatively low EDF, but if we try to explain it via a dynamical quintessence field, we might add a new scalar field, phi q, with a potential v phi q, that has multiple parameters, mass, coupling constants, shape of the potential. This significantly increases the EDF. The firewall's accounting asks, does this increased complexity, this higher cost G, by a proportionally better compression of the data, a much lower cost DG? Or is it just a more elaborate way to make the energy momentum tensor balance, a complex off-book entry to hide the fact that we don't understand the ledger's fundamental rules? If the complex model doesn't significantly improve the fit, lower chi-squared, or make novel testable predictions, its higher cost is unjustified. The energy tally appears conserved only because we allowed ourselves a flexible, expensive grammar to force it. The operational interpretation is model comparison via Bayesian evidence, or MDL, in cutting-edge data analysis. When the LIGO collaboration detects a gravitational wave, they don't just fit one waveform model. They compare thousands of template waveforms, rules G, with different complexities, masses, spins, eccentricities, and use Bayesian evidence to select the one that best describes the data with the fewest effective parameters. This is complexity accounting in action. The firewall role is that of the audit gate. You are the auditor. When a rule is presented, you demand to open its books. You ask, show me the parameters and their effective degrees of freedom. Show me the compression gain. What is the description length of the raw data versus the description length using your rule? Show me the penalty terms in your BIC calculation. Are there hidden levers, unstated prior assumptions that act as silent parameters? You are performing a forensic accounting of the rule's informational economy. Let's state clearly what is allowed and forbidden. A rule can have high complexity, high EDF, if it achieves a dramatically better fit, very low chi-squared, such that the total description length is minimized. It can also have high complexity if that complexity is non-negotiable, forced by a higher principle like a symmetry, for example, gauge symmetry demanding a new field, that itself provides a massive compression of other phenomena. In this case, the cost of the new field is amortized over its explanatory power across many datasets. You may not claim a rule is simple without providing a quantitative complexity measure, like EDF, BIC, description length. Ignore the correlation between parameters when calculating effective degrees of freedom. Use a complexity measure that can be artificially gamed. For example, claiming a neural network with 1,000,000 weights is simple because it has a low-dimensional manifold without proving it. Justify added complexity with post hoc, cherry-picked data fits. What happens when the check fails? The license consequence is severe. Fail, rule is labeled high complexity, low trust, permitted only as a temporary engineering fit with severe scope limits. It is not granted a license as a fundamental law. It may be used as a phenomenological tool in a specific domain, like a polynomial fit to engineer a wing shape, but it is barred from the foundational canon. Its parameters are recognized as fitting knobs, not deep constants of nature. Now, we must state the explicit prediction and falsification for the complexity accounting system. Prediction. Yeah, grammar is genuinely efficient, a good compressor of reality. It will compress the observed sentence ensemble better than competitors while keeping predictive performance stable across regime shifts. As new data from new omega k v regimes arrives, Its total description length will remain lower than alternatives, and its parameters will not need radical retuning. This is the prediction of robust compression. Falsification condition for a rule's efficiency. If the grammar's effective complexity grows roughly with the dataset, if it needs to add new parameters or functional forms to accommodate each new batch of phi sentences, it is overfit. It is memorizing the windows, not extracting a law. The falsification is the linear scaling of EDF with n. A true law compresses, its EDF is fixed. A fake law expands to consume the data offered to it. A canonical example is the comparison of Kepler's laws to Ptolemaic epicycles. Kepler's three laws have very low EDF, a few parameters, semi-major axis, eccentricity, orbital period. They compress the entire dataset of Tycho Brahe's planetary observations into a stunningly compact form. The Ptolemaic model, in contrast, required a new epicycle, a new parameter set, to account for each new planetary anomaly. Its effective degrees of freedom grew with the data. It was a poor compressor, memorizing the past rather than predicting the future. Complexity accounting would have flagged it centuries earlier. Now, let's explore an Afghanistan-inspired analogy that makes the urgency of honest accounting visceral. The auditing of a community grain silo following a drought. A village's grain silo is its collective survival. After a lean year, the council must audit the stocks to plan for winter. The silo keeper presents his ledger. Rule GA: efficient, truthful accounting. The ledger shows initial stock 1000 kharvars, harvest input 200 kharvars, consumption 1100 kharvars, final stock 100 kharvars. The model is simple. Final equals initial plus input minus consumption. It has very few parameters, the recorded quantities. To verify, the council independently measures the final stock by physically counting sacks. It matches 100 kharvars. The description length is short. The rule, the simple equation, is cheap, and the residual, the measurement match, is perfect. The rule compresses reality efficiently. The keeper, who has been skimming grain, presents a complex ledger. Initial stock, 1000 kharvars. Harvest input, 200 kharvars. Official consumption, 1000 kharvars. Loss to weevils, variable rate, 50 kharvars. Loss to spillage, newly observed, 30 kharvars. Mysterious evaporation, a new term I just added, 20 kharvars. Final stock, 100 kharvars. This rule has many new adjustable parameters: weevil rate, spillage, evaporation. It too matches the final measured stock of 100 kharvars. Its fit is perfect. But its complexity cost is high. The council, acting as auditors, apply the firewall's principles. They perform a complexity audit. 1. Effective degrees of freedom. Rule GB has many new post hoc loss mechanisms. Their EDF is high. 2. Compression test. Did this complex rule provide a better fit? No. Both rules predict the same final stock. The complex rule doesn't lower the residual cost, cost DG. It just increases the model cost, cost G. 3. Stability prediction. They test the rule's parameters. They inspect the silo for weevil damage, K-check, and find little. They review past years for spillage records, omega check, and find none. The complex rule's parameters are not robust. They were invented to balance this year's books specifically. 4. Try unity check. The losses are all passive, things vanishing. There's no coherent tri-unity story linking time, when did spillage happen, space, where is the spilled grain, And motion. What was the mechanism? The complexity is ad hoc and unbalanced. The audit concludes. Rule GB is overfit. Its complexity is unjustified. It is a just so story designed to hide the true, simpler explanation: theft, or a miscalculation in the consumption parameter. The Council rejects the complex ledger, places trust in the simple one, and investigates the discrepancy based on the simpler model's clearer signal. The complex accounting was a smokescreen. In Holophase science, the grain silo is our corpus of experimental data. The simple ledger is a minimal physical law. The complex ledger is a theory with many adjustable parameters, extra fields, and auxiliary hypotheses invented to fit every new anomaly. The Council is the scientific community acting as complexity auditors. Without this ruthless accounting, we would accept ever more baroque theories that fit existing data perfectly but explain nothing, all while the missing grain of true understanding is stolen from right under our noses. Now we state the mandatory episode 11 axioms, now enforced by rigorous accounting. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. Complexity accounting is the tool that enforces effective variation and scope discipline. A rule with bloated EDF cannot honestly survive variation. It will adapt its many parameters to each new variation, pretending to succeed. It cannot have clear scope. Its boundaries are fuzzy because its many knobs can be tweaked to push the failure point around. By forcing a low description length, we ensure a rule is brittle in a good way. It will break cleanly when its limited capacity is exceeded, clearly defining its scope. And when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. Under complexity accounting, the first response to a failure is not to add a new epicycle, increasing EDF, but to check if the failure invalidates the core compression. If it does, the rule's license is downgraded or retired. We seek a new, more efficient compressor, not a patch on an inefficient one. The skill you gain from this part is forensic complexity analysis. You learn to look past the elegance of an equation to its informational footprint. You demand the BIC, the EDF, the compression ratio. You ask, how many bits did this theory save? What is the cost per explained phenomenon? This skill is the ultimate defense against sophisticated intellectual fraud, whether in physics, economics, or policy. This has immediate, decisive application in string theory and multiverse cosmology. The central critique is one of complexity accounting. The theory has a vast landscape of solutions, high EDF. Does it compensate with the correspondingly massive compression of unexplained facts? Or is it a flexible framework that can fit anything by choosing the right vacuum, thus having a near infinite description length? Machine learning and AI. The field is built on complexity control, regularization, dropout, early stopping, to prevent overfitting. NDL is a foundational principle here. Macroeconomics. Are complex econometric models with hundreds of variables truly more explanatory than simple heuristic rules? Or are they just overfitting historical noise? Consciousness studies. Is the hard problem a signal of missing compression in our physical models, or an invitation to add costly new ontological primitives that destroy parsimony? Finally, let's summarize the epistemic function of this part, the capstone of our epistemic engineering. We have defined complexity and degrees of freedom accounting as the firewall's ultimate audit mechanism. It quantifies the simplicity of a rule through measures like effective degrees of freedom, EDF, and minimum description length. Description length equals cost G plus cost DG. This prevents the manipulation of simplicity by providing an objective, computable cost function. The firewall acts as an audit gate, demanding open books on a rule's parameters, its compression performance, and its penalty terms. The explicit prediction is robust compression. An efficient grammar will maintain superior data compression across regime shifts. The explicit falsification condition is complexity growth with data. If a rule's EDF scales with n, it is memorizing, not explaining. The license consequence is the labeling of high complexity rules as low trust engineering fits, denying them foundational status. This completes the epistemic firewall's core filtration system. A rule must now pass through the syntax gate, HLS meta, the proof obligations court, the type checking inspector, the anti-gambling registry, the data council, the minimal packing gate, and finally, this complexity audit. Only a rule that is well-formed, provably capable, type consistent, honestly searched, robustly inferred, maximally parsimonious, and informationally efficient can earn a broad license to be called a law of phi. This is how science remains sane. This is how we build knowledge that is not just believable, but inevitable, given the data. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Carry the ledger of the complexity auditor. In the marketplace of ideas, be the one who demands to see the real price. This ruthless, loving discipline is the highest form of respect for the truth. Now we bridge to a final, pervasive danger that lurks even in the most honest and efficient of rules. Even honest complexity can hide ghosts, tacit assumptions. This leads us to the final cleansing function of the firewall. Salam, and peace be upon you.